Age of Sigmar has a lot of factions and it can be very difficult to decide which one to play. So to help you make that choice, I am covering all of the factions in this series so that you can answer the question, should I play this faction? Today we're going to be talking about the Nighthaunt, whose brand new battletome is available for pre-order right now. This new rule set is bringing a very big shift to the army. Previously, Nighthaunt was an aggressive army that loved to charge into combat and had many ways to do so while gaining advantages from charging. With the new book, the army is changing into more of a grindy playstyle of tougher models and lots of objective control being more of a focus. The Nighthaunt faction was created when Nagash attempted a grand ritual in the realm of Shyish. Although the ritual was interrupted by Skaven, the dead rose all over the realms in what is now named the Necroquake. One of the consequences of this was an entirely new army being formed, one composed of hateful spirits doomed by Nagash to serve his will and pay for any atrocities he deemed that they had committed in their lives. The Nighthaunt are a fearsome force with some very unique characteristics on the tabletop. The plan for this video is to break down common questions about the faction, the playstyle, the types of models, how you might get started in the army, and more. To start off the video, we're going to talk about the playstyle of Nighthaunt. Nighthaunt are a primarily melee faction. It does have some shooting options, but it's not the primary focus of this army, and from what I can tell, they're not being run a lot right now by many players. This is also a big spellcasting faction with some really great wizards and some very potent spells to cast. This faction does not have any priests, however. Another hallmark of this faction is their mobility. Nighthaunt is made up entirely of flying units, meaning you can pass over other units and terrain with ease. The average move of this faction is 8 inches, which is well above the average compared to other factions. Nighthaunt have some very cool and thematic faction battle traits. The first one we're going to talk about is Ethereal. This is an army-wide passive that prevents negative modifiers from affecting your save values. Essentially, what we're talking about here is nullifying your opponent's weapons with Rend. This is a very strong rule, and in the new book, you are allowed to boost your own save roll with abilities like all-out defense, which previously you couldn't do. Because your save rolls cannot be affected by Rend, it means that you always get to make save rolls. However, Nighthaunt units generally have pretty bad 5-up and 6-up saves to compensate for this. They do, however, have a 5-up ward and more health in the new book. We'll break this down more in the stats section, but the takeaway here is that Nighthaunt has become tankier than they were in their previous iteration. Nighthaunt also have a new objective control based battle trait called Mounting Dread that lowers your opponent's objective control values when they are fighting Nighthaunt units on objectives. The value that you debuff your opponents by increases every single battle round. Essentially, the other army is being filled with terror, and by the end of the battle they are thoroughly spooked. This is a cool rule because you'll likely find yourself with smaller units in the later rounds, and then the battle will continue and you'll lose more and more models. Smaller units have less objective control, but with this ability, your opponent's smaller units will have a difficult time contesting any objective, making it easier for you to score points. Another new feature for Nighthaunt is a battle trait that allows you to teleport on each of your turns. It costs 1 command point and allows Nighthaunt units to disappear from the battlefield, appearing in another location to flank your opponent, grab an objective, or score a battle tactic. This is a very powerful ability, and the fact that it's not tied to a specific unit or a battle formation gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, this wouldn't be an undead faction without some recursion effects to bring back defeated units to the battlefield. When you play a game as Nighthaunt, you'll set up 3 pieces of faction terrain called Nexus of Grief. Each turn you can move one of your crypts to suddenly appear near a Nighthaunt unit. Then at the end of every turn, yours and your opponent's turns, you can pick one of your faction terrain pieces and up to 3 of your Nighthaunt units that are nearby to heal or to resurrect slain models. This means that your opponent, if they don't finish off a unit, well, it may well come back to full strength before too long. Also, if your opponent's units battle too closely to a Nexus of Grief, they will be unable to use any command abilities with those units. One last thing to mention is that when you play a death faction, you have the opportunity to bring the God of Death, Nagash, in your army list. This is a massive model that costs near half your points, but he is able to cast 9 spells per turn and has some really crazy abilities. He doesn't benefit from ethereal, but he has lots of other tools at his disposal. If using a god model appeals to you, then Nighthaunt or any of the other death factions might be worth looking into. Now let's talk a little bit about how army customization options can affect the way that you play Nighthaunt. The army has 4 different battle formations in the new battletome, and they allow you to change the style of your army ever so slightly. The first battle formation allows you to move a Nighthaunt unit that is in combat. The unit can move through other models, it is a ghost after all, and there is a bonus roll to add to that move. This is so impactful because you actually can move and pick the combats that are favorable to you. It's a big deal. It also allows you to break enemy lines and lock up ranged units into combat or go hero and wizard hunting. This is so impactful that it costs points to bring this battle formation. The second formation allows you to charge and shoot with a Nighthaunt unit even if you retreat. If you do retreat, it won't take any retreating damage, and similar to that first formation, picking combats is so important, and so being able to retreat out of one combat, shoot at somebody, and then charge into another combat will be very, very impactful. This can also help you turn on charge bonuses with cavalry if they are in your army list. The third formation allows one Nighthaunt hero in combat to deny any enemy retreats. This is more niche than the first two, but it is interesting that if you wanted to pin a key enemy piece into combat with a hero, you could just keep them there without fail. This could work well with the new Lady Olinder, as she has a pretty interesting passive that makes it so enemies can only hit and wound her on 5+ rolls. Ultimately, it's still pretty risky to depend on a hero getting into combat, as heroes will die easily with not that much health to their names. The fourth and final battle formation gives 2 Nighthaunt units anti-charge +1 rend on your opponent's turn. Anti-charge is a fun effect and can often scare off a player from charging altogether. Paired with the right units, you could make it a very unappealing situation where your opponent doesn't want to fight you, but really has no choice but to. I really like all of these battle formations. They're all very interesting. I love that each of them has something meaningful that changes the way that not only you play the faction, but maybe even how you're going to build your army before you even get into the match. And this is how battle formations should be written, rather than just being passive +1 buffs. Nighthaunt have been around since 2nd edition, and they have tons of models for you to pick from. So we are going to be taking a look at all the different models that you can play as. And so if you're curious, there are 12 heroes in this faction, and there are 12 non-hero units in this faction. We're going to start by talking about the brand new hero that is available for pre-order now, the Lord Vitrolic. This is an infantry hero with a single ranged attack capable of spiking some damage, but the main reason that you're going to bring him is his Spectral Alchemy ability. It has 6 possible effects. You can roll a 3+ and pick one of those effects, or you can roll 2 dice and take whatever you get. Some of the effects are quite powerful, including turning off ward rolls for enemies, or subtracting from a wizard's power level. The Lord Vitrolic seems strong enough to make it into an army list, or most army lists really, which is great to see with a new hero model. Now let's take a moment to talk about all the other models that you can look forward to building and painting for your Nighthaunt army. We'll start with the heroes. Nagash, the Supreme Lord of the Undead, is a god model, and if you choose to use him, it's going to take up almost half of your points for army building. But what you will get is a +2 casting value for up to 9 spells per turn. He also has an instant kill ability for heroes and monsters that get into combat with him. And finally, he can replace a full Nighthaunt unit once per game with no reduction in unit size or power, essentially reducing his points cost by whatever you resurrected. We then have Lady Olinder, the Mortarch of Grief, who is another named character and the leader of the Nighthaunt forces. As mentioned earlier, she has a great defensive passive that will help her survive. She is also a wizard too, and has a unique spell to debuff enemies. She brings a once per game board-wide ability that returns models to your Nighthaunt units. Ulrach the Drowner is a rare hero that is also a war machine. He has a once per game teleport for himself and a Nighthaunt unit, which can be pretty strong, but it's less relevant now that it is part of a battle trait in the faction. Still, teleporting is so strong that I'd be interested to see if he can still be used effectively. Then we have Kurdos Valentin, the Craven King. He's a pretty strong melee profile with 2 rend and 3 damage. He also has some synergy with the Craven Throne Guard unit and can tax your opponent's command points, which is pretty powerful. Reikenor, the Grim Hailer, is our final unique hero. He is a wizard that excels at fighting other wizards and priests. He has an interesting damage spell, which can spike damage if it slays models. He also has a unique ability to increase his spellcasting modifier and wizard level. Moving on to the unnamed heroes, we have the Guardian of Souls, which is a wizard hero that can buff allied wound rolls. There's the Knight of Shrouds, and also the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, which is a combat hero that can heal himself by whatever damage he deals to an enemy in combat. You can build him as the infantry hero or as the cavalry version, and he allows either infantry or cavalry and war machines to chain fight with him depending on which version you pick. The Cruelgast Crusader is an infantry hero that provides an aura to reduce incoming damage to any Nighthaunt units wholly within 12 inches of it. The Lord Executioner can reduce the number of attacks that an enemy unit can make, which is a very powerful effect. He also has the chance to automatically slay any hero that he is in combat with at the end of the turn. The Scriptor Mortis is an infantry hero that uses an ability to sentence enemy models. If you attack a sentenced model, your units will get the Crit Mortals ability, which is very strong. Finally, we have the Spirit Torment, which is an infantry hero that allows you to roll extra rally dice when rallying nearby Nighthaunt units. This is yet another way to aid to your regeneration of ghosts that have fallen in battle. Moving on to the non-hero units, we have the Black Coach, which is a very popular war machine that has decent health, some shooting, and solid melee. It has impact mortal damage when it charges, and it can also teleport once per turn anywhere on the battlefield. If the Black Coach kills an enemy unit, it is able to use an end of the turn ability to revive a Nighthaunt hero that has been slain. The Bladegeist Revenants are a unit of 12 warriors with great blades that can deal solid damage. They also have an incredibly unique ability that forces enemies to have a charge roll of at least 7 inches to charge them if they are on an objective. Anything lower than 7 inches will fail. Chainghasts are a 2-model infantry unit with high health, high rend on both their shooting and melee attacks. However, because of their low model count and an inability to be reinforced, and only 1 damage on their weapons, they're not going to be damage dealers. They do have an interesting buff to add +1 to hit for Nighthaunt units. Chain Rasps are a horde unit, and only at 90 points for 10 it's easy to bring a lot of them. Up to 3 units of Chain Rasps can use a pre-game move in the deployment phase, which is very important because you can grab objectives before the game even starts in order to begin the game with control of them. This is also very helpful for scoring battle tactics. The Craven Throne Guard are the main spammable ranged unit in Nighthaunt, if you want to go in that direction. They have a specific synergy with the hero Kurdos. When he charges, he allows them to shoot again. Their shooting isn't spectacular, and they hurt for being a unit of 5 rather than a unit of 10. It means they have less shots than other factions ranged units might get. They do have an ability that lets them retreat from combat easily, so they can't escape if they get pinned. Dreadblade Heroes are a 2-model cavalry unit that can increase the control score of allies when charging and teleport each turn around the battlefield. They have decent damage as well. The Dread Scythe Harridans are a unit of 10 infantry that prevent enemies from healing or reviving their models when in combat with this unit. Then we have the Grimghast Reapers, which are another unit of 10 models. They can deal mortal damage before fighting, and they excel when they're fighting other infantry. The Hexwraiths are an expensive 5 unit of cavalry that does more damage on the charge. I've been told this is a very old unit and is likely to be discontinued in the future. The Mirmorn Banshees are a unit of 4 infantry that can spike damage, especially against wizards. They also have a spell Unbind, which is a very clutch and unusual characteristic for a non-hero unit. The Pyregeists are a special unit from the Age of Sigmar skirmish game Warcry. They are also one of your shooting options for this faction. They have fantastic models and really interesting rules. They have a solid shooting combat attack, and at the end of the turn, they have an ability that lets you deal damage to enemies and increase your control score. Finally, we have the Spirit Hosts, which is a 3-model unit that can increase any Nighthaunt hero's ward roll to a 4+ if they stay within combat range of this unit, which is a very powerful defensive buff. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the lore of Nighthaunt in this video, but if you are curious about their lore, consider checking out my Every Age of Sigmar faction explained in 24 minutes video for an introduction to the faction. From what I've seen online in discussion and also on some tier lists, Nighthaunt are one of the easiest factions for a new player to start painting. They do really well with the slap chop method, and in general they just look really good with a few colors. They dry brush well, especially if you base with contrast paints, and at the end of the day, any army can be as difficult as to paint as you want it to be, depending on what scheme you go for, how challenging it is, but there is less trim on Nighthaunt units. There is things that you don't have to worry about, like legs and boots and belts and pouches and other small pieces and accessories that you might see in other factions. There's just lots of cloaks and weapons and chains and the ghost form to paint. Next, we'll talk about where Nighthaunt falls on the scale of elite to horde army. Traditionally, people would describe Nighthaunt as a horde army, which means you will have to paint a lot of models. There's lots of 10 model units and you can reinforce them to 20 model units. However, with the new book changing the survivability of a lot of the units, Nighthaunt is moving further away from horde status. If you lean into some of the lower count models and a lot of heroes, you're going to have a bulkier force. However, it's still really easy to build a massive horde of ghosts, and you can play that way, and many people will be playing that way. Next, we're going to take a look at the price of a Nighthaunt army, and these are always estimates as points can change, and when points change, it means that you can fit more or less models into your army, which changes the price of the army. The estimation that I'm doing here also includes buying faction terrain and the manifestations, and so if you're not buying those things, it would be cheaper than what I'm saying. And while you can get away without manifestations if you really want to, the faction terrain for Nighthaunt specifically is pretty important, so I think you're going to want to get it. By the way, whenever I say these prices in these videos, it's just the base price of what they're charging for these models from Games Workshop, and if you go to a friendly local gaming store, there is a good chance that you will get a discount from this price. So I did some digging around for some army lists and I priced them all out, and what I found out was that I kept getting basically the exact same price every time, which is just around $900 Canadian or $650 US for the average Nighthaunt army. That's not so bad. It's similar to what I've seen when I've made up price lists for other armies as well, and so that's great. However, I do want to talk about the bundles available to Nighthaunt players, because there is a new Spearhead box which comes with a Spirit Torment, 2 Chainghasts, 2 Dreadblade Harrows, 10 Dreadscythe Harridans, and 10 Bladegeist Revenants. It looks like a pretty solid box, and you could buy it twice to reinforce the models that you get. Although in the case of the Spirit Torment and the Chainghasts, they cannot be reinforced. You can also look for the old Spearhead box, which might be easier to find if you search for Nighthaunt Vanguard instead, as that's what it used to be called. It comes with a Knight of Shrouds, 10 Grimghast Reapers, 20 Chainwraths, and 3 Spirit Hosts. If you were to buy one of each of these boxes, you'd be off to a pretty good start for your army with a lot of unique models. You'd need to add faction terrain and grab a couple of named heroes, but you'd be very close to a full 2,000 point army. I did some quick math, and if you bought both boxes, Lady Olander, Kurdos, the faction terrain, you'd be very close to 2k points, and you would have only had spent about $600 Canadian or $430 American, which is $300 less than what I quoted. This is just an estimated price, and I don't claim that this is going to make you a tournament-ready army, but it's just a very economical way to get to 2,000 points and to be able to start playing a legal game. It also has some room for customization because you buy the boxes and then how you upgrade from there with heroes is totally up to you, and those last few units you get could be reinforced units or maybe different units that you want to try out. Next, we're going to be talking about the general stats that you might see in this faction, and I am discussing averages here. So what I say might not hold true for every single unit in this faction, but it will give you a general idea of what each group of these units will do and what you can expect to have dice-wise when you get into this faction. In general, the units in this faction are going to have a 6+ save if they are non-hero and a 5+ save if they are a hero unit. The whole faction has a 5+ ward, and that means that 1 in 3 damage points are negated. When I first started playing Warhammer, I vastly underrated a 5+ ward, and through playing a lot of games where I had a 5+ ward, I realized that it was seriously helping my units stick around a lot longer. And this was in Cities of Sigmar. Now imagine you're in a faction like Nighthaunt, where when you keep units alive longer, you can actually heal them and bring them back from death. Nighthaunt units are also getting a health buff in the new book, and many of the 1 health models went to 2 health, and the 2 health models went to 3 health. The adjustment for the faction getting these extra health and 5+ wards is that there's no longer any 4+ saves in the army. According to our Warhammer statisticians, these changes are going to result in a more durable army. In general, most of the models in this army have an 8 inches of movement, and the cavalry have 12 inches of movement. All units in the faction can fly, and this is above average mobility compared to other factions. When you pair that with several battle formations, giving you extra movements as well, you are seriously mobile. For the most part, this faction hits on 4s, which is always rough, and wounds on 3s, and it doesn't have a lot of ways to modify these stats. From what I can see, there are a few options, but now those chain ghasts, which had that +1 to hit aura, have gone up in estimation of their value for me personally in this army. And they do come in the new Spearhead box. There's not a lot of rend in this faction, and aside from the Dreadblade Harrow's cavalry unit, the Black Coach, the other non-hero units are all stuck at damage 1. The Hex Wraiths can get to damage 2, but only if they've charged. And this is part of why people are saying Nighthaunt is becoming a grindier faction. They are a lot harder to kill, but they do less damage. If you want extra rend from anti-charge, you have to take a battle formation, and then that means that you're saying no to some pretty good battle formations. Nighthaunt does have a spell that reduces the save roll of an opponent, but it doesn't take effect until the unit that received that spell has actually fought with all of their attacks. All future units that attack the target will get the benefit, but it requires some planning to make full use of it. There's also an artifact of power that can be given to a hero that has a once per battle ability. This ability gives a +1 attack buff to all Nighthaunt units within a bubble, and so this can be a massive boost in damage. Because it's once per game though, you really need to pick and set up your go turn wisely. One last note, this faction has a lot of critical hit abilities, so if you're good at rolling 6s, then this just might be the faction for you. Before I wrap up this video, I do want to acknowledge that this new battletome has been a massive shakeup for Nighthaunt players. Many of them have started this army in 4th edition and will have loved all of the battle traits being related to making charges and charging from combat to combat and putting buffs and debuffs and all sorts of charge related things. The playstyle has undergone a massive adjustment, and this can be a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of players. Hopefully, many of the players love the lore and the models and are ready to pivot to a new way to play, but I do feel for the gamers that loved their army style and now have no choice but to look elsewhere if they want to get something similar to that playstyle back. So I just wanted to say sorry to all the Nighthaunt players that are feeling rough about the way that their faction got shaken up, and I hope that you can find something that you're looking for. I hope that this video has helped you decide whether or not Nighthaunt will be your first ever, or maybe your next army that you are going to play. And Nighthaunt veterans, let me know if I missed any information that you want to share with prospective Nighthaunt players. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you all soon enough in another video.